The hammer rang against the anvil like a bell tolling judgment, and Rowan Thornfield knew before he opened his mouth that Thora Tusk was going to say no. She stood at the forge in her leather apron, soot streaking her forearms up past the elbows, green skin gleaming with honest sweat in the firelight. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and she held the tongs with the easy confidence of someone who had shaped 1,000 horseshoes and would shape 1,000 more. When she caught sight of him crossing the smithy yard, something flickered across her face, too quick to name, before her expression settled into careful neutrality. "Reeve Thornfield," she said, her voice steady. "What brings you out on a cold afternoon?" Rowan stopped a respectful distance from the forge, close enough to feel its warmth but far enough that he would not interrupt her work. "I came to ask you something," he said. "The winter feast is 3 days away." Her hand tightened on the tongs. The horseshoe she was shaping glowed orange in the coals. "I know when the feast is. I would like you to come with me, as my guest." The horseshoe hissed as she plunged it into the water barrel. Steam rose in a cloud between them. When it cleared, Thora was looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. "No," she said simply. "May I ask why?" "Because I said no. That is reason enough." She pulled the cooled shoe from the water and examined it with exaggerated care, holding it up to the fading afternoon light. "Was there anything else, Reeve?" He had expected resistance, but not quite such a flat refusal. "I had hoped you might at least consider it." "I have considered it. My answer is no." She set the horseshoe aside and reached for another piece of iron. "Master Grimm will be back soon. He can help you with whatever smithing you need." Rowan stood there a moment longer, watching her work. She moved with practiced efficiency, placing the iron in the coals, working the bellows, never once looking at him. He recognized a dismissal when he saw one. "Thank you for your time," he said finally, and left. The next morning he returned. Thora was cleaning the tools, wiping down hammers and organizing chisels on the workbench. Master Grimm, the village farrier, was shoeing a cart horse in the yard, his broad back bent to his work. "Thora," Rowan said. She did not turn. "I told you no, you did, but I do not think I explained myself properly." He came around to where she could see him, leaning against the workbench. "The feast is important this year. The village is choosing a new grain factor, and I want people to see what unity looks like." Now she did look at him, her amber eyes sharp. "Unity? You want to parade me in front of the village like some kind of symbol. That is not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" She set down the hammer she had been cleaning with a decisive thunk. "Because it sounds to me like you want to make a point, and I am the point you want to make." "I want to go to the feast with someone whose company I enjoy," Rowan said honestly. "That is you. The rest is just context." Her expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. "Still no, Reeve. Find another way to make your point." He left again, but he found himself back at the smithy the next afternoon, the day before the feast. This time Thora was alone, banking the forge fire for the evening. She saw him coming and straightened, crossing her arms. "3 times is just stubborn," she said. "Then we have that in common." Rowan stopped in front of her. "Thora, I am not asking as the Reeve, I am asking as Rowan. I would like to spend the evening with you." "Why?" The question came out quieter than he expected, almost vulnerable. "Because you are clever and honest and you do not tolerate nonsense. Because you work harder than anyone I know. Because when you laugh at something, it is always genuine." He met her eyes. "Because I like you. Is that reason enough?" For a moment he thought he saw something crack in her careful armor. Her hands uncrossed, and she looked away toward the dying light of the forge. "No," she said finally, but her voice wavered. "I am sorry, Rowan, but no." She turned and walked into the smithy, and this time he knew better than to follow. That evening, Rowan sat in his small office in the village hall, staring at the grain ledgers spread before him. The numbers told a story he did not want to read. The harvest had been good but not exceptional, and the village had grown by 3 families since last winter. The stores would run short in late winter, perhaps February, unless they secured additional grain. Aldrich Masterton, the feast master and the wealthiest landholder in the village, had made his offer clear. He would provide the loan of grain the village needed, at fair interest, in exchange for certain assurances about the new grain factor position. Nothing unseemly, Masterton had said, just a guarantee that the new factor would maintain fair trade practices with established families. What Masterton had not said, but what Rowan understood perfectly well, was that he expected the reeve to show up to the feast alone, to court Masterton's favor, to dance attendance on the powerful families who held the village's future in their well-fed hands. Bringing Thora would insult Masterton. It would signal independence, defiance, a willingness to put personal preference above political necessity. It would almost certainly cost him the grain loan and possibly his position as reeve if the village council decided he was too young and too reckless for the responsibility. But she had said no anyway, so the question was moot. Rowan closed the ledgers and rubbed his eyes. Tomorrow he would go to the feast, smile and dance and make small talk, and try not to think about the woman who had refused him 3 times. The winter feast was held in the village hall, which had been transformed with pine boughs and candles until it glowed like something from a legend. Long tables lined the walls, laden with roasted meats and winter vegetables, preserved fruits and fresh bread. The whole village would be there, dressed in their best clothes, ready to celebrate the longest night and look forward to spring. Rowan arrived early alone, wearing his good wool coat and the silver chain of office that marked him as reeve. Aldrich Masterton greeted him at the door, a tall man with iron-gray hair and the confidence of someone who had never wanted for anything. "Thornfield, good to see you. Come in, come in." Masterton clapped him on the shoulder. "I have saved you a seat at the high table. We have much to discuss." "Thank you, Masterton." Rowan let himself be steered toward the place of honor, nodding to familiar faces as the hall filled. The musicians were tuning their instruments in the corner. Children chased each other between the tables. It was warm and bright and festive, and he felt hollow. He was making conversation with Masterton's daughter, a pleasant young woman named Cecily who clearly had no interest in him beyond politeness, when the hall fell silent, not gradually. All at once, as if someone had thrown a blanket over the noise. Conversations cut off mid-word. A child's laugh died abruptly. Even the musicians stopped tuning. Rowan turned to see what had caused it. Thora stood in the doorway. She wore a dress the color of deep forest green, simple but well-made, belted at the waist with tooled leather. Her hair was still in its practical braid, and she wore no jewelry except for small wooden earrings. She looked nervous and defiant in equal measure, her chin up, her hands steady at her sides. She was looking directly at him. Rowan stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. He crossed the hall in what felt like slow motion, every eye tracking his movement. Whispers started to rise behind him like a wave, but he did not look back. When he reached Thora, she spoke before he could. "I changed my mind." "I am glad," he said, and offered her his arm. She took it, her hand warm even through his sleeve, and together they walked into the feast. The silence held for perhaps 10 more seconds, thick enough to drown in. Then Masterton's voice cut through it, loud and jovial and edged with something sharp. "Reeve Thornfield. Will you not introduce your guest?" Rowan felt Thora's hand tighten on his arm, but he kept his voice steady. "Most of you know Thora Tusk, Master Grimm's assistant at the smithy. She is my guest this evening." Your guest. Masterton came down from the high table, his smile fixed. How unexpected. I did not realize I needed to clear my guests with you, Masterton. Of course not, of course not. The older man waved a hand expansively. But I confess I am surprised. This is the winter feast, Thornfield, a sacred occasion, our oldest families, our closest community. His gaze slid to Thora. I had not realized we were extending invitations so broadly this year. Every hearth in the village is invited, Rowan said evenly. That has always been the custom. Every hearth, yes, but your guest does not hold a hearth, does she? She is employed labor. Masterton's smile never wavered. I mean no offense, you understand. I merely point out the tradition. Thora's voice was quiet but clear. I will go. You will not. Rowan kept his hand over hers, holding her in place. She is my guest, Masterton, and I vouch for her. If you have an objection, state it plainly. The hall had gone silent again. Masterton's smile finally faded. Very well. Plain speaking, then. You know what I offered you, Thornfield. The grain loan your village desperately needs. The support of the established families for your tenure as reeve. All I asked in return was good judgment and an understanding of proper order. He gestured at Thora. This is not good judgment. That is your opinion. It will be the village's opinion soon enough. Masterton turned to address the hall at large. You all know the situation we face. A hard winter ahead, stores running low. I have offered to provide what is needed at fair terms, but I cannot support a reeve who puts his personal whims above the good of the community. Who brings a creature to our sacred feast and expects us to welcome her? Someone gasped at the word creature. Rowan felt Thora flinch, and rage flared hot in his chest. Thora Tusk is not a creature, he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the hall. She is a skilled craftswoman who has shod your horses and mended your tools and worked harder than most of you can imagine. She deserves respect, not insults. Pretty words, Masterton said. But words will not feed us in February, so I put it to you, Reeve Thornfield. A choice. Send the creature away, accept my grain loan, and let us proceed with the feast in proper fashion. Or keep her at your side, refuse my offer, and explain to the village how you plan to keep them fed when the stores run out. Rowan looked at Thora. Her face was carefully blank, but he could see the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes had gone distant. She was already pulling away, already preparing to leave. You could have just said no, she murmured. I would have understood. I know, he said. Then, louder to Masterton. I choose her. The words fell into the silence like stones into a well. Masterton's expression hardened. Then you are a fool, perhaps, but I am an honest fool. Rowan turned to face the assembled village. Masterton has made his offer conditional on my obedience. I will not be obedient, not in this. If any family here wishes to object to Thora's presence, speak now. Let us put it to a vote of hearths, as is proper in matters that divide us. It was an old tradition, rarely invoked. Each established household in the village held one vote, regardless of wealth or size. It was meant to prevent the powerful from simply dictating terms to the weak. Masterton's eyes narrowed. You would gamble the village's winter on a vote. I would let the village decide for themselves rather than be ruled by one man's prejudice. Very well. Masterton gestured to the village clerk, a nervous man named Wendell who had been trying to disappear into the wall. Wendell, call the vote. Does this village accept the reeve's guest with all that implies, or do we demand he choose our welfare over his fancy? Wendell cleared his throat. All in favor of accepting the guest stand. For a long moment nobody moved. Rowan felt his heart sink. Then old Master Grimm, the farrier, stood up from his seat near the back. I stand for Thora. She is a good worker and a good person, and I will not see her shamed. A few more people rose. a farmer whose plow Thora had mended, a woman whose daughter had been given a small iron flower that Thora had shaped in her spare time. One by one, perhaps 15 people in all. Those opposed stand. Masterton stood, along with his family. The merchant families followed, and the larger landholders and those who depended on Masterton's good will for their livelihoods. Rowan counted them as they rose. 18. Maybe 20. Wendell counted officially, his face pale. 22 in favor of the guest, 24 opposed. He looked at Rowan with something like pity. "The measure fails, Reeve." Thora pulled her hand from Rowan's arm. "I should not have come." "Do not," he said sharply. Then, gentler, "Please stay." "Why, you heard them, you lost." Her voice was rough. "You lost your grain loan. You might lose your position. And for what? So I could stand in a room full of people who hate me. They do not all hate you, you saw that. 22 people out of a village of 200, some victory." Masterton was smiling again, back in control. "Well, Thornfield, will you see reason now?" Rowan looked at the faces around the hall. Some sympathetic, some hostile, most just uncomfortable. He thought about the grain ledgers, the hungry weeks ahead, the responsibility he carried. He thought about what it would mean to give in now, to send Thora away, to pretend the vote had taught him his proper place. He thought about the feel of her hand on his arm. "No," he said. "We stay." He led Thora to a table on the side of the hall, not the high table but not hidden away either, and sat down beside her. The feast resumed slowly, awkwardly, conversation starting and stopping like a rusty wheel. The musicians played, but the music sounded thin. People ate, but there was little joy in it. Masterton left early, taking his family and his closest allies with him. Nearly a quarter of the hall emptied in their wake. Rowan barely tasted the food. Thora sat stiff beside him, her hands folded in her lap. Once she said quietly, "You should have let me go." "I know what I should have done," he replied. "I did what I wanted to do instead. That is a luxury most people cannot afford. Then I am fortunate." She looked at him finally, really looked at him, her amber eyes searching his face. "You do not feel fortunate right now." "No," he admitted, "but I do not regret it either." They left the feast before it officially ended, walking out into the cold night. Snow had begun to fall, soft flakes drifting down through the darkness. Thora stopped on the steps of the hall and tilted her face up to the sky. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Truly, I told you, I wanted to spend the evening with you, an expensive evening." "Yes." He stood beside her, watching the snow fall. "Thora, why did you refuse me 3 times?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Because I knew this would happen. Not exactly this, but something like it. You would pay a price for being seen with me, and I did not want to be the cause of that. And yet you came." "Yes." "Why?" She turned to look at him, and in the lamplight spilling from the hall he could see her expression clearly. Vulnerable, afraid, defiant. "Because I am tired of protecting other people from the consequences of caring about me. Because I wanted one evening where I did not have to pretend I do not exist. Because you asked me 3 times and you looked at me like I mattered, and I am not strong enough to say no a 4th time." Rowan reached for her hand. She let him take it. "You do matter. We will see." She squeezed his hand once, then let go. "Go home, Rowan. Sleep. Tomorrow you will have to figure out how to feed the village without Masterton's grain. I know. Do you have any ideas?" "Not yet." He tried to smile. "But I am told I am good at finding solutions. You had better be." She started down the steps, then paused. "Thank you. For tonight. Even though it was a disaster, thank you." She walked away into the snow, and Rowan watched her go until she disappeared into the darkness. The next week was brutal. Masterton made good on his implicit threat, not just withdrawing his grain offer, but actively working against Rowan. He called for a council meeting to discuss the reeve's fitness for office. He spread rumors that Rowan cared more about courting monsters than serving the village. He leveraged every debt and favor he was owed to turn opinion against the young reeve. Rowan weathered it as best he could. He met with the village council and laid out the grain situation honestly. The stores would run short in late winter unless they found another source. He sent letters to neighboring villages, seeking trade agreements or loans. He inventoried every root cellar and granary, looking for reserves that might stretch the supply. The answers that came back were discouraging. Other villages had their own concerns. The harvest had been merely adequate across the region, and nobody was eager to part with grain on uncertain terms. He saw Thora twice during that week, both times at the smithy when he brought his horse to be reshod. She was polite but distant, focusing on her work, not meeting his eyes. Master Grimm tried to make conversation about the weather, but even his cheerful determination could not bridge the awkwardness. "She is protecting you," Grimm said after Thora had excused herself to fetch more nails. "Thinks if she keeps her distance, Masterton will ease off." "Will he?" "Not likely. Masterton does not ease off. He wins or he crushes." The old farrier hammered a nail into place with more force than necessary. "But she does not know that. She still thinks she can make it better by disappearing." "I do not want her to disappear." "Then you had better tell her that. And you had better solve this grain problem, because if the village goes hungry, they will blame you both." Rowan knew Grimm was right. He returned to his office and pulled out the ledgers again, running the numbers for the 10th time, the 20th, searching for an answer that did not exist in the columns of figures. It was on the 8th day after the feast that Thora came to see him. She arrived at his office just after sunset, still in her work clothes, smelling faintly of smoke and metal. Rowan stood up from his desk, surprised. "Thora, I need to speak with you." She glanced around the small office, taking in the piles of correspondence and the open ledgers. "You look terrible. I have been working. You have been worrying." She closed the door behind her and sat down in the chair across from his desk without waiting for an invitation. "I have a solution to your grain problem." He sat down slowly. "I am listening. My clan lives 2 days north of here on the river. We fish the deep pools through the winter, smoke the catch, trade it down to the coast. We always have surplus." She folded her hands in her lap, her voice steady and businesslike. "I can negotiate a trade agreement. Smoked fish for winter vegetables, dried fruit, whatever you have that we need. It will not be grain, but it will keep people fed." Rowan stared at her. "Your clan would be willing to trade with a human village. If I ask them, yes. We have a saying, blood feeds blood. I am blood, even if I live among humans. They will honor my request." "Why have you not mentioned this before?" She looked down at her hands. "Because it would mean revealing myself, revealing my connections. I have worked hard to be just Thora, the farrier's assistant. Not Thora of the River Clan, not Thora who has family and obligations and a whole life beyond this village. I wanted to be separate. And now I see that separation is a lie I told myself to feel safe." She met his eyes. "I cannot be separate. Not from you, not from this village, not from my own people. So I will use the connections I have. I will go to my clan, negotiate the trade, and arrange for fish wagons to come through once a fortnight until spring." Rowan felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had been carrying for days. "Thora, this would save us, I know. How soon can you leave? Tomorrow, if you give me leave from my work. Master Grimm will complain, but he will manage." She hesitated. "I will need something from you, though. A letter of authority, explaining the situation and giving me the power to negotiate on the village's behalf. My clan will want assurance that the village will honor whatever agreement we make." "Done. I will write it tonight." He reached across the desk, covering her hand with his. "Thank you." She did not pull away. "Do not thank me yet. I still have to convince my uncle, and he is a stubborn old catfish. If he is family, I am sure you can handle him. You have more faith in me than I do." But she was almost smiling. She left an hour later with the letter tucked safely in her bag, along with a detailed list of what the village could offer in trade. Rowan watched her go with a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief that there might be a way forward, anxiety about sending her off into the winter alone. But Thora was capable. He had to trust that. The days after her departure were tense. Masterton, sensing that something had shifted, increased his pressure on the village council. There were whispers that the reeve had mismanaged the stores, that his incompetence would cost them all dearly. Rowan deflected as best he could, hinting that he had a plan in motion, but he could not give details until Thora returned. Master Grimm covered for her absence, telling anyone who asked that his assistant had family business to attend to. Most people seemed to accept that, though a few muttered about the unreliability of orc workers. Rowan kept busy, inventorying the stores again, organizing work parties to repair the granary and clear roads for eventual supply wagons. He did not let himself think too much about what would happen if Thora's plan failed. There was no point in borrowing trouble. She returned on the 13th day, riding in on a wagon loaded with sealed barrels. The wagon driver was an orc man with iron-gray skin and a face like weathered stone. He nodded to Rowan but did not speak, letting Thora handle the introductions. "This is my uncle, Garth Tusk. He leads the River Clan's trade operations." Thora jumped down from the wagon, looking tired but satisfied. "We have an agreement." Uncle Garth climbed down more slowly, his eyes scanning the village with the wariness of someone entering potentially hostile territory. 6 barrels of smoked pike and river trout, top quality, enough to feed 200 people for a fortnight if you ration sensibly. In exchange, you provide us with winter squash, preserved apples, and turnips. The list is in the contract. He handed Rowan a folded document. Rowan scanned it quickly, noting the precise quantities and delivery schedules. The terms were fair, almost generous. "This is acceptable," Rowan said. "More than acceptable, thank you," Garth grunted. "Thank my niece. She argued your case like a lawyer, wore me down until I agreed just to get some peace." Thora's ears flushed slightly. "I explained the situation. Uncle Garth made his own decision." "I made a business decision," Garth corrected. "This trade route benefits both sides. If your village can be trusted to honor the terms, we will continue it through the winter and perhaps beyond." "We will honor it," Rowan said firmly. "You have my word as reeve." "The word of a man who brings my niece to village feasts and causes political trouble." Garth's expression was unreadable. "Thora told me about the vote, about the grain merchant who withdrew his support." Rowan glanced at Thora, who was suddenly very interested in the contents of the wagon. "Yes." "That happened. Stupid," Garth said bluntly. "You should have let her walk away." "Uncle," Thora said sharply, "I am not criticizing girl. I am stating facts. Politically, tactically, it was a stupid choice." Garth looked at Rowan with something that might have been respect. "But I understand why you made it. Thora is worth any number of grain merchants." He turned back to the wagon, ending the conversation. Thora came to stand beside Rowan as her uncle supervised the unloading of the barrels. "He likes you," she said quietly. "He thinks I am stupid." "Yes, but he likes you anyway. For Uncle Garth, that is high praise." The arrival of the fish barrels created a stir in the village. People gathered to watch as Rowan and a crew of volunteers hauled the barrels into the cold storage cellar. Master Grimm made a show of inspecting the contents, declaring the fish to be of excellent quality. By evening, word had spread that the reeve had secured an alternative food source for the winter. Masterton, predictably, was not pleased. He called another council meeting, this time to question the wisdom of entering trade agreements with orcs. Rowan attended, bringing the contract and a barrel of fish as evidence. "The terms are fair," he explained to the assembled council. "We trade surplus vegetables for preserved fish. Both sides benefit, and this establishes a new trade route that will serve the village long after this winter is over." "Trade with monsters," Masterton said flatly. "You have made us dependent on monsters." "Trade with the River clan who have lived in this region far longer than we have," Rowan corrected. "And we are not dependent. This supplements our stores, it does not replace them. We will still have our own grain, we will simply have more variety and more security." One of the older council members, a woman named Elspeth who ran the village mill, spoke up. "I have had River clan folk through here before, trading for milled flour. They always paid fair and caused no trouble. If this is the same group, I see no issue with the arrangement." "It is the same group," Thora said from where she stood at the back of the room. "My Uncle Garth is an honest trader. He will honor the contract." Masterton turned to glare at her. "You brought her to a council meeting now. She negotiated the contract," Rowan said. "She has every right to be here to answer questions about it. She has no rights in this village. She is not a landholder, not a hearth holder, not even a citizen. She is a laborer." "So are half the people in this room," Elspeth said sharply. "When did we start requiring land ownership for attending open council meetings?" The argument went on for another hour, but in the end the contract was approved by a narrow margin. Masterton and his allies voted against it, but enough council members saw the practical benefit to tip the balance. Rowan left the meeting exhausted but victorious. He found Thora waiting outside in the cold. "You did not have to stay," he said. "I wanted to hear the result." She fell into step beside him as they walked toward the smithy. "Masterton will not forgive this. I know. He will keep working against you, against us. Let him." Rowan stopped, turning to face her. "Thora, I am tired of worrying about Masterton's approval. The fish wagons will keep coming. The village will see the benefit of the trade agreement, and eventually even Masterton will have to accept that his grain monopoly is broken. You think it is that simple? No, but I think it is manageable." He reached for her hand, and this time she did not hesitate to take it. "I am more concerned about you. How are you doing?" "Truly," she was quiet for a moment, considering. "Better. Seeing my family helped. Uncle Garth said I looked too thin and worked too hard. My cousin tried to convince me to come back to the clan, said I did not owe you humans anything." "What did you say?" "I said I was not there out of obligation. I was there because I wanted to be." She looked up at him. "Is that still true? Is what still true, that you want me here? After everything that has happened, after all the trouble I have caused, do you still want me here?" Rowan pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. She came willingly, resting her forehead against his shoulder. "Yes," he said simply. "I want you here. I want to see you every day. I want to hear you laugh and watch you work and argue with you about things that do not matter. I want to build something with you, something that lasts." She was shaking slightly, and he realized she was crying. He held her tighter. "I fell in love with you months ago," she whispered. "I told myself it was impossible, that you could never see me as anything but the orc who worked at the smithy. Then you asked me to the feast and I panicked because I knew if I said yes I would have hope, and hope is dangerous. Hope is necessary. For you, maybe. You are human. You can hope for whatever you want." She pulled back enough to look at him, tears streaking her cheeks. "I have spent my whole life being careful, being small, trying not to draw attention. And then you walked across that feast hall like you were proud to have me on your arm, and I did not know what to do with that." "You could start by believing it," Rowan said. He wiped the tears from her face with his thumb. I am proud to stand with you. Not because it makes a political point, not because it benefits the village, but because you are extraordinary and I am very, very fortunate that you said yes." She kissed him then, fierce and sudden, and he kissed her back with months of pent-up feeling. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she was smiling. "I love you," she said. "I should have said it before. I love you too." He rested his forehead against hers. "We will figure this out, together." "Together," she agreed. The winter was hard, but not as hard as it might have been. The fish wagons came every fortnight as promised, and Thora accompanied each one, sometimes bringing her uncle, sometimes bringing cousins or clanmates who were curious about the human village. Gradually, people in the village began to accept the orc traders as a normal sight. Rowan and Thora became more open about their relationship. They walked together through the village, had supper together at the tavern, sat together at council meetings. Some people still whispered, but the hostility faded as the weeks passed and the food stores held steady. Masterton remained a problem, but a diminishing one. His attempt to monopolize the grain supply had failed, and other merchants began dealing directly with the village, bypassing his network. By late winter, his influence had waned considerably. It was in early March, with the snow beginning to melt and the first hints of spring in the air, that Rowan called another council meeting. This time, he had a proposal. "The trade agreement with the River Clan has been successful," he began. "More than successful. It has opened new opportunities for the village and established goodwill with our neighbors. I propose that we formalize this relationship by offering Thora Tusk a hearth seat on the council." The room erupted in argument. Masterton, predictably, objected strenuously. But Elspeth supported the motion, as did several other council members who had seen the benefits of the trade agreement. "She has contributed more to this village this winter than half the people sitting at this table," Elspeth said. "She deserves recognition." "She is an orc," Masterton said. "She is a resident who has served the village well," Rowan countered. "The law does not require council members to be human, only that they hold a hearth or contribute significantly to the community's welfare. Thora qualifies on both counts." "She does not hold a hearth," Masterton objected. "Then I propose we grant her one. There is the old Carr cottage, vacant since last fall. We could deed it to her in recognition of her service." The vote was closer than Rowan would have liked, but it passed. Thora, who had not been expecting the proposal, looked stunned when he told her afterward. "A hearth seat," she repeated. "Rowan, that is unprecedented. Good, it is time for some things to change." He took her hands in his. "You are part of this community, Thora. People are starting to see that. Let them make it official." "What if I do not want to be official? What if I just want to be your partner, not some symbol of progress?" "You will be both," he said gently. "You already are, but this gives you a voice in decisions that affect your life. That is important." She considered this. "The Carr cottage is tiny, barely 2 rooms. We could expand it. Add a workshop, maybe. You could do your own smithing projects. Master Grimm would never forgive me if I left the forge. Then keep working with him and use the cottage for your own work, whatever you want." She was smiling now. "You have this all planned out." "I have had months to think about it." He pulled her into his arms. "Say yes, Thora, join the council, take the cottage, build a life here with me." "Is this a proposal?" "Not yet, but it could be if you want it to be," she laughed, the sound bright and free. "Yes. Yes to the council seat, yes to the cottage, yes to building a life with you. And when you actually propose, the answer will be yes to that too." "Good to know." He kissed her, right there in the middle of the street, not caring who saw. The spring shearing was a village tradition, a celebration of the new season when everyone came together to shear the sheep and process the wool. It was hard work but joyful. full of music and laughter and the sense of new beginnings. This year, Rowan added another element to the tradition. With Thora's consent, he arranged for their wedding to be part of the celebration. It was not a formal affair, no grand ceremony or elaborate feast. They stood in the village common on a bright April morning, surrounded by friends and family in half the village, and exchanged simple vows. Thora wore a crown of spring flowers that her cousin had woven, and Rowan wore his best shirt and a smile he could not contain. Master Grimm served as witness, declaring loudly that it was about time the reeve made an honest woman of his assistant. Uncle Garth attended with a delegation from the River clan, and Rowan's own parents came down from their farm to the north, his mother crying happy tears and his father shaking his head in amused resignation. Even Masterton attended, though he stood at the back and did not participate in the celebration afterward. Rowan caught his eye once and saw something that might have been grudging respect. Masterton had lost, and he knew it, but he was enough of a realist to accept the new order. After the vows, after the congratulations and the dancing and the shared meal, Rowan and Thora slipped away to the Carr cottage. They had spent the past month making it livable, adding furniture and fixing the roof, and it was small but cozy, a place that was entirely theirs. "So," Thora said, leaning against the doorframe and looking at him with a smile, "we did it. We did." Rowan came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Any regrets?" "None, not a single one." They stood there for a moment, watching the sun set over the village. In the distance they could hear music and laughter from the shearing celebration, but here it was quiet, peaceful. "What do you think happens next?" Thora asked. "I have no idea," Rowan admitted, "but I am looking forward to finding out." She turned to kiss him, and he kissed her back, and whatever the future held, they would face it together. The months that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both new and deeply right. Thora took her place on the village council, her practical wisdom and direct manner earning respect even from those who had initially opposed her seat. She continued working with Master Grimm during the day, but in the evenings she worked on her own projects in the small workshop they had built onto the cottage. Beautiful ironwork began to appear around the village. A new weather vane for the mill, decorative hinges for the hall doors, a memorial marker for the village green. Each piece bore her mark, and each piece made her more undeniably part of the community. Rowan's tenure as reeve became smoother as the political landscape shifted. The success of the River Clan trade agreement led to other innovations. A new granary charter that broke Masterton's monopoly, regular trade fairs that brought merchants from across the region, improved roads that made winter travel less treacherous. The village prospered, and while not everyone credited the young reeve and his orc wife for the improvements, enough people did that opposition to their relationship faded to occasional grumbling. Masterton himself became less of a presence. His influence waned as new families rose to prominence, and while he never apologized for his behavior at the winter feast, he did eventually come to Rowan with a business proposal for a joint venture in timber. Rowan accepted, recognizing the offer for what it was, a practical man's way of acknowledging changed circumstances. The River Clan trade continued to grow. What had started as a desperate solution to a food shortage became a permanent fixture of village life. Thora's relatives visited regularly, and gradually the sight of orcish traders in the market became unremarkable. Children who had grown up seeing Thora as a respected member of the community did not carry their parents' prejudices, and while mistrust still existed, it was eroding. In the autumn after their wedding, Thora came to Rowan with news that made his heart leap. She was pregnant. They celebrated quietly, just the two of them in the cottage, both excited and terrified in equal measure. "What if the child looks like me?" Thora asked, her hand resting on her still flat belly. "Green skin, tusks, all of it. Then we will have a beautiful green child with tusks," Rowan said, "and they will be loved." "What if they look like you?" Same answer. "Loved completely and utterly." "What if the village does not accept them?" "Then the village will have to change." He covered her hand with his. "We have already proven that is possible." The pregnancy was not easy. Thora was sick for months, could barely keep food down, worked herself to exhaustion trying to maintain her normal routine. Master Grimm finally put his foot down and insisted she take time to rest, hiring a temporary assistant to cover her duties at the forge. Thora hated being idle, but she eventually accepted that growing a child was work enough. Rowan fussed over her constantly, bringing her ginger tea and making sure she ate properly, reading to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but lie in bed. She teased him about being overprotective, but he could tell she appreciated the attention. Uncle Garth sent a midwife from the clan, an older orc woman named Marta, who had delivered 3 generations of River Clan babies. She stayed with them for the last month of the pregnancy, teaching Rowan what to expect and preparing Thora for the birth. Their son was born on a cold night in early spring, arriving with a loud cry that seemed to shake the rafters. He had his mother's green skin and pointed ears, his father's brown eyes and human proportions. Thora counted his fingers and toes 3 times, crying and laughing simultaneously, while Rowan held them both and felt his heart expand beyond what he thought was possible. They named him Xander Thornfield, and he was perfect. The village's reaction was mixed. Some people welcomed the baby with genuine warmth, bringing gifts and offering congratulations. Others were less certain, maintaining a polite distance. But the hostility that Rowan had feared never materialized. Perhaps people had grown accustomed to the unusual, or perhaps a baby was simply too innocent to hate. Master Grimm declared himself the child's honorary grandfather and spoiled Xander shamelessly, carving wooden toys and telling rambling stories about the old days. Uncle Garth visited when he could, pronouncing Xander to be a fine, strong boy who would grow up to be a credit to both his peoples. Raising a child was harder than Rowan had anticipated. Xander was a colicky baby who barely slept, and both parents spent months stumbling through their days in a haze of exhaustion. But there were also moments of piercing joy. Xander's first smile, his first laugh, the way he reached for his mother when she came home from the forge. Thora proved to be a fierce and devoted mother, though she struggled with fear that she was not doing it right. "I never paid attention when my cousins had babies," she confessed one night, pacing the floor with a crying Xander against her shoulder. "I was always at the forge instead. What if I am terrible at this?" "You are not terrible at this," Rowan assured her. "You are learning same as me. We will figure it out together." And they did, gradually finding their rhythm as parents. Thora learned to nurse while working on small pieces at her bench. Rowan mastered the art of changing a diaper in under a minute, and both of them learned to function on far less sleep than they had thought possible. As Xander grew from infant to toddler, his personality emerged, curious, stubborn, affectionate, with his mother's determination and his father's easy smile. He loved the forge, was fascinated by fire and metal, would sit for hours watching Thora work. He also loved animals, chasing the village cats and trying to befriend every dog he met. The village children were initially wary of him, unsure what to make of a boy with green skin. But children are adaptable, and Xander was friendly and cheerful. By the time he was 3, he had a pack of friends who thought nothing of his appearance. It was around this time that Thora raised the question of a second child. "I know it was hard," she said. "The pregnancy, the birth, all of it. But I do not want Xander to be alone." "Neither do I," Rowan agreed. "If you want another baby, I am ready." Their second son arrived 2 years after the first, an easier pregnancy and birth. They named him Henrik Thornfield, and he had his father's pale skin and his mother's amber eyes. He was a calm baby, the opposite of his brother, content to lie in his cradle and watch the world with solemn attention. Xander was initially suspicious of the intruder who had claimed his parents' attention, but he warmed to Henrik quickly, declaring himself to be the best big brother in the whole village. Rowan and Thora watched their sons play together and felt the rightness of it, the sense that they were building something that would last beyond themselves. The years passed in a blur of council meetings and forge work, of children's milestones and village festivals. Rowan's position as reeve became so established that few could remember a time when he had not held the role. Thora's ironwork became sought after across the region, and she began teaching apprentices, passing on her skills to a new generation. The cottage grew as their family grew, new rooms added as needed, the workshop expanding to accommodate Thora's growing business. It was never grand, never ostentatious, but it was theirs, filled with love and laughter and the comfortable chaos of family life. Uncle Garth passed away when Xander was 8, quietly in his sleep after a lifetime of hard work and honest dealing. Thora grieved deeply, and Rowan held her through the tears, reminded of his own parents' mortality. They took the boys to the River clan for the funeral, and Rowan was struck by how naturally his sons moved among their orc relatives, how easily they bridged the two worlds of their heritage. Master Grimm also passed, 3 years later, and Thora took over the smithy officially. It was bittersweet, honoring the man who had given her a chance when few others would have, but carrying forward his legacy. She hired her own assistant, a young orc woman from a clan to the east, and the cycle continued. Masterton outlived them all, growing old and cantankerous, but never quite admitting he had been wrong about anything. When he finally died at the age of 83, Rowan attended the funeral and said kind words about a complicated man. Masterton's children, who had grown up in a village where humans and orcs traded freely, were more pragmatic and less prejudiced than their father had been through it all. Rowan and Thora remained the steady center of each other's worlds. They argued sometimes, about money or child rearing or council politics, but they always came back together. They worked side by side, raising their children and serving their community, and they built a life that neither of them had imagined possible on that night when Thora had walked into the winter feast. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Rowan took Thora back to the village hall, now renovated and expanded. They stood in the doorway where they had stood all those years ago when the whole village had gone quiet. "You remember?" he asked. "Every second," she said. "I was so afraid." "So was I, but you took my arm anyway. Best decision I ever made." He pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I would do it again in a heartbeat. Even knowing everything that came after, the struggle, the prejudice, the politics, especially knowing that. Because it also brought us this, 2 wonderful sons, a community that accepts us, a life filled with meaning." He tilted her face up to kiss her. "I love you, Thora Thornfield. I loved you then, I love you now, I will love you until my last breath." "I love you too," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me." "Always," he promised. They stood there in the doorway as evening fell, 2 people who had defied expectations and built something beautiful from courage and love. Inside the hall, the village was gathering for the spring festival, and they could hear music starting up, laughter echoing off the walls. "Shall we go in?" Thora asked. "Together," Rowan said, offering his arm. She took it, just as she had 20 years ago, and together they walked into the light. Their sons were waiting inside. Xander now a tall young man working as an apprentice at the forge, Henrik studying to be a clerk. Both boys waved when they saw their parents, and Rowan felt a swell of pride and gratitude. This was his legacy. Not just the improvements he had made as reeve, not just the trade agreements and political victories, but these two strong young men who moved easily between worlds, who had never known a time when love between different peoples was forbidden. The festival swirled around them, familiar faces old and new. Some of the younger council members approached Rowan to discuss business, but he waved them off. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight is for celebration." Thora was pulled into conversation with her apprentices, who wanted to show her a new technique they had been practicing. She listened attentively, offering suggestions and encouragement, and Rowan watched her with the same wonder he had felt 20 years ago. She had only grown more beautiful to him with time, her strength and grace undiminished. Later, when the dancing started, he claimed her hand and led her onto the floor. They moved together with the ease of long practice, not the most graceful dancers, but perfectly matched to each other's rhythm. "What are you thinking about?" Thora asked as they spun. "How far we have come, how much has changed." "Not everything has changed. I still love you just as much as I did when I said yes to your proposal." "More, I hope." "More," she agreed, smiling up at him. "Always more." The music swelled and the dancers whirled, and in the center of it all, Rowan and Thora moved together. Two people who had chosen love over fear, who had built bridges where others had built walls, who had proven that change was possible when people were brave enough to try. As the night wore on and the festival showed no signs of slowing, they finally slipped away, walking home through the quiet streets hand in hand. The cottage was dark when they arrived, the boys having stayed at the festival, and they had the rare luxury of privacy. 20 years, Thora said, leaning against Rowan in the doorway. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "I know what you mean." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Any regrets?" She turned in his arms to face him. "You know I hate that question. Indulge me. No regrets, not one. Everything we went through, every struggle and hardship led us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." She kissed him softly. "With you, always with you." "Always," he echoed. They went inside and closed the door on the world, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would endure. Outside, the village slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that their reeve and his wife stood watch. And in the cottage, Rowan and Thora held each other close, grateful for every moment, every challenge overcome, every joy shared. The future stretched before them, unknown but unafraid. They had faced down prejudice and politics, had raised children and built a community, had proven that love could bridge any divide. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together, hand in hand, heart to heart. And that, Rowan thought as he drifted off to sleep with Thora in his arms, was more than enough. It was everything. Years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of seasons turning and children growing. Xander eventually took over the smithy fully, when Thora decided to focus more on her council work and specialized commissions. He married a human woman from a neighboring village, a potter named Sarah, who had no qualms about his mixed heritage. Their wedding was a joyful affair that brought both clans together, and Rowan and Thora stood as witnesses, proud beyond measure. Henrik followed a different path, his scholarly nature leading him to become the village's official record keeper and eventually a magistrate. He married later to an orc woman from the River clan, Thora's cousin's daughter. The circle completed itself in ways neither Rowan nor Thora had anticipated, their family tree becoming a living symbol of the integration they had fought for. Grandchildren arrived in due time, a boisterous collection of personalities and appearances. Some had green skin, some pale, some a shade in between. All were loved fiercely by their grandparents, who spoiled them with stories and treats and patient attention. Rowan built them toys in his workshop, having taken up woodworking in his later years. Thora taught them basic metalwork, letting even the youngest ones hammer soft copper into simple shapes. The village council eventually pressured Rowan to step down as reeve, not from any scandal but simply because he had served for over 30 years and deserved rest. He agreed reluctantly, and the council elected his successor, a young woman, half-orc herself, daughter of a trader family that had settled in the village years before. Rowan attended her installation ceremony with pride, seeing his life's work validated in ways he had never quite dared to hope. Thora continued on the council for a few more years, but eventually she too stepped back, content to let the younger generation lead. She spent her days in the workshop, creating increasingly intricate pieces, teaching anyone who wanted to learn, and enjoying the peace that came with age and accomplishment. On a warm summer evening when Rowan was 63 and Thora 62, they sat on the porch of their cottage watching the sun set over the village. Their hands were wrinkled now, Rowan's hair gone completely gray and Thora's streaked with silver, but they still fit together as perfectly as they had on their wedding day. "I have been thinking," Thora said idly, "about that night, the winter feast." "You think about it often," Rowan observed. "I do. I still remember how terrified I was, how certain I was that going through that door would be a disaster." "It was a disaster," Rowan said with a smile. "We lost the grain loan, nearly lost my position, caused a village-wide political crisis. And then we fixed it. You fixed it." I just stood there looking stubborn. She laughed, the sound still bright despite the years. "We fixed it together, that is the point. Everything we faced together. I could not have asked for a better partner." He squeezed her hand. "Thank you for saying yes. All those years ago, thank you for changing your mind and coming to the feast. Thank you for asking. Thank you for being foolish enough to choose me over political convenience." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I won the day I met you, Rowan Thornfield. I just did not know it yet." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, listening to the sounds of the village settling in for the night. Somewhere down the street, their grandchildren were playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. In the smithy, Xander would be banking the forge fire, preparing for the next day's work. In the records hall, Henrik would be filing away the day's business, meticulous as always. The cottage behind them was filled with memories. Carved initials on the doorframe marking the boys' heights as they grew, scorch marks on the workshop floor from experiments gone wrong, a cradle in the corner waiting for the next grandchild. Every room held stories, every object a moment preserved. "Do you think we made a difference?" Thora asked quietly. "Really made a difference, I mean, not just for us but for everyone." Rowan considered the question seriously. "Yes, I think we proved it was possible. We showed people that love does not care about the color of your skin or the shape of your ears. We raised children who never questioned whether they belonged. We built bridges that others have crossed." He turned to look at her. "We made a difference." "Good," she said simply. "That is all I wanted." They stayed there until the stars came out, two people who had built a life from courage and love, who had faced down prejudice and fear and emerged victorious. The village around them was quiet now, peaceful, and they were part of that peace, woven into its very fabric. Eventually, the night grew cool enough that they went inside, closing the door on the world once more. But this time there was no uncertainty, no fear of what tomorrow might bring. There was only contentment, the deep satisfaction of a life well lived and a love that had endured. Rowan banked the fire while Thora prepared tea, and they sat together in the kitchen that had seen 1,000 meals and 1,000 conversations. They talked about small things, plans for the garden, a commission Thora was considering, whether Xander should expand the smithy again. Comfortable, domestic, utterly ordinary, and utterly extraordinary for what they represented and what they had overcome. When they finally went to bed, Thora curled against Rowan's side as she had for 40 years, and he wrapped his arms around her with the same wonder he had felt the first time. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," she whispered back. And in the quiet cottage, surrounded by the life they had built together, Rowan and Thora Thornfield drifted off to sleep, content in the knowledge that they had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they had found it. Their story was one of courage in the face of prejudice, of love triumphing over fear, of two people who had refused to accept the limitations others placed on them. It was a story that would be told for generations, whispered to children as they fell asleep, shared around festival fires, passed down as a reminder that change was possible when people were brave enough to reach for it. But for Rowan and Thora, it was simply their life. The only life they had wanted, the only life they had needed. A life built on a single choice made in a moment of courage, when a young man had walked into a winter feast with an orc woman on his arm and refused to be ashamed. A life that had been worth every struggle, every hardship, every moment of doubt. A life that had been, quite simply, beautiful. And as they slept, the village around them slept too, secure and peaceful, a testament to everything they had built and everything they had proven possible. The cottage stood quiet in the darkness, a home filled with love and memory and hope. And somewhere in the distance, the River Clan's trade wagons made their way along the roads that Rowan and Thora had helped to build, carrying goods and goodwill between communities that had once been strangers. The world had changed, one small village at a time, one brave choice at a time. And it had started with a single moment, a reeve taking an orc woman's arm and walking into a feast hall despite the cost, despite the consequences, because some things mattered more than political convenience or social acceptance. Love mattered. Courage mattered. Doing the right thing, even when it was hard, mattered. Rowan and Thora had proven that, and in proving it, they had given hope to countless others who would follow in their footsteps. Their legacy was not measured in wealth or power or political achievement, though they had accomplished much in those areas. Their legacy was measured in the children who grew up seeing no barrier between peoples, in the marriages that crossed old divides, in the community that had learned to look beyond appearances to see the person beneath. It was a legacy of love, and it would endure long after they were gone. But for now they were still here, still together, still building their life one day at a time. And that was all they needed, all they had ever needed. Each other and the courage to keep choosing each other, no matter what the world might say. In the morning, they would wake and begin another day, another chapter in their ongoing story. There would be work to do and grandchildren to spoil and councils to advise, and a community to serve. There would be challenges and joys, sorrows and celebrations, all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that made up a life. But tonight, they simply rested, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that finding. Two people who had proven that love was stronger than prejudice, that courage could change the world, and that sometimes the most radical act was simply choosing to be happy, despite what others thought you deserved. Rowan and Thora Thornfield, Reeve and Smith, human and orc, husband and wife, partners in all things. Their story was complete, and it was perfect.